All right, let's get this deep dive started. Today we're diving deep into the fascinating world of the CB1 receptor.
Wow, yeah.
And I'm excited to really dig into all the research you sent over on cannabinoid signaling.
Okay.
But we're going to focus on the structure and distribution of CB1 today.
It really is fascinating, how this one receptor,
Great.
it plays such a huge role in all these different functions all across the body.
Yeah, it really...
And it really highlights how complex and interconnected our biological systems really are.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into the real nitty-gritty of it all, can you kind of give us a quick refresher on just cannabinoid receptors in general?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So cannabinoid receptors are a type of G protein-coupled receptor,
Okay.
or GPCR.
Mhm.
They're basically these complex proteins that are embedded in cell membranes.
Got it.
And they act as these cellular gatekeepers.
Okay.
And when a specific molecule binds to the receptor,
Yeah.
it triggers this whole cascade of events inside the cell.
Like a key.
Yeah.
Fitting into a lock
Exactly.
and setting off a chain of reactions.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
Okay.
And when it comes to cannabinoid receptors,
Yeah.
we have these two main players, right? CB1 and CB2.
Right. And today we're really focusing in on CB1.
Yes, exactly.
What is it about CB1 that is so intriguing to you?
Well, one of the most fascinating things, I think, is that CB1 was discovered before scientists even knew what its natural binding molecule was.
Wow.
Imagine finding the lock before you even have the key.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it wasn't until 1992 that researchers actually identified anandamide, which is the body's own endocannabinoid, as the key that unlocks CB1's potential.
So they found the lock and they were searching and searching for the key and then finally...
Yeah.
That's incredible.
It's amazing.
That's a really cool story.
Yeah.
It speaks to the complexity of scientific discovery, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that complexity, right, it extends to the structure of CB1 itself. Like other GPCRs, it's not just kind of sitting there on the cell surface.
Yeah.
It's actually woven into the membrane
Mm-hmm.
with these 7 distinct regions that we call transmembrane domains.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And those snake in and out of the cell.
So it's like almost like it's going through airport security.
Right.
And each one of those domains is like another level of checks.
Exactly.
Yeah, before you can get to the gate.
That's a really good way to visualize it.
Okay.
So these domains create a very specific 3D shape.
Yeah.
With binding sites for molecules like anandamide and, even THC from cannabis.
Right, right.
And the way that these molecules actually fit into the receptor determines the cellular response.
So it's not just about the binding, it's about how it binds.
Yeah, it's the specific way that the molecule interacts with the receptor's structure.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So now we know that CB1 is primarily found in the central nervous system.
That's right.
But in the research you sent over, you mentioned that it's also found in other parts of the body.
Yes.
It's not just limited to the brain.
So it's like it's got a lot of different destinations.
Exactly. Yeah, you could think of it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, its headquarters is definitely the central nervous system.
Right.
The brain and spinal cord.
Yeah.
But it also has these outposts in other areas. It's like, it's got backstage passes to all these different systems.
So it's not just a brain thing, which I think is probably a misconception that a lot of people have.
Right.
So where else can we find CB1 hanging out?
Well, if we were to kind of take a tour of the body, right?
All right.
We would find high concentrations of CB1 in the hippocampus,
Right.
which is that region of the brain that's so vital for memory formation.
Right.
Then we could swing by the basal ganglia,
Okay.
which plays a key role in movement and coordination.
So when we talk about, CB1 influencing memory and movement,
It's actually there.
it's literally present in those regions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just this abstract concept. It's really there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow, that's wild.
And the tour doesn't stop there.
Okay.
We can also find CB1 in the gut,
Okay.
where it influences appetite and digestion.
So that's why when people, partake in certain herbal remedies,
Yeah,
it
right.
can lead to those intense cravings.
That's definitely a contributing factor, yeah.
Okay.
Now, while the concentrations are lower outside of the central nervous system,
All right.
CB1 does still have a presence in places like the heart and immune system.
Right.
It really just highlights that wide-reaching influence of the endocannabinoid system.
It's fascinating how this one receptor, pops up in so many seemingly unrelated parts of the body.
Yeah.
It really begs the question, what is it actually doing in all these different locations?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting, and we're just getting started.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've seen that CB1 is basically everywhere in the body.
Right. It's like we mapped out CB1's travel itinerary.
Yeah.
But now we want to know, what is it doing at all of these different destinations?
Exactly.
Yeah, what's its purpose?
So CB1 has all these different functions.
Okay.
And that really reflects how the endocannabinoid system is trying to maintain this balance throughout the entire body.
Yeah.
So let's start with neurotransmission,
Okay.
which is essentially how brain cells communicate with each other.
Got it.
And CB1 plays a really big role in modulating this communication.
Okay, modulating. So
Yeah.
is it kind of like a volume control for brain signals?
Yeah, you could think of it like that.
Okay.
So when CB1 is activated,
Yeah.
it can actually inhibit the release of other neurotransmitters.
So it's like putting on the brakes
Exactly.
and reducing the amount of these brain chemicals that are being released.
Yeah. And those neurotransmitters,
Okay.
there's some really big names when it comes to brain function. Like
Okay.
dopamine, GABA.
I've heard of those, yeah.
Yeah. They play key roles in everything from mood and motivation to even anxiety and sleep.
So by influencing the release of these neurotransmitters,
Right.
CD1 is sort of like indirectly shaping our emotional and behavioral responses.
Absolutely. It's a powerful influence.
Yeah.
And it just emphasizes how interconnected all these different brain systems are.
Right.
So beyond neurotransmission,
Oh.
CB1 also has this important role in pain modulation,
Okay.
which is basically a fancy way of saying it's involved in our body's natural pain relief system.
So it's like we have our own internal pharmacy,
Yeah,
and CB1 is like one of the pharmacists.
that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, this is why some cannabinoids, like those found in cannabis,
Right.
they have this therapeutic potential for managing chronic pain
Mm-hmm.
because they can actually tap into this endocannabinoid system.
Got it.
And they potentially help to regulate those pain signals.
So it's like giving our natural pain management system a little helping hand.
Exactly.
Okay, so, and we talked about this a little earlier, but CB1 is also involved in appetite regulation.
Yeah, it's not just about the munchies,
Right, yeah.
although that is a well-known side effect.
Yeah, I've heard of those.
But so when CB1 is activated in certain parts of the brain,
Yeah.
it can increase appetite.
Okay.
And this can be, beneficial or detrimental.
Yeah, like it's good if you need to stimulate your appetite,
Right.
but if you're trying to manage your weight,
Yeah, exactly.
then it's probably not so good.
Yeah. So it really highlights the complexity of the endocannabinoid system, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And the importance of really understanding all these mechanisms involved
Right.
before we can develop really targeted therapies.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about how CD1 is like this master regulator,
Right.
but how does it actually work on this molecular level?
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
So remember those 7 transmembrane domains?
Yeah, those are the ones that kind of weave in and out of the cell membrane.
Okay, so those domains, they're actually super important in how CB1 actually functions.
Okay.
So let's say a molecule like anandamide
Yeah.
binds to CB1.
Okay.
What happens next?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Well, picture it like this domino effect.
Okay.
So when that molecule binds, it causes the receptor's shape to change.
Okay.
And we call this a conformational change.
So the receptor's kind of like shifting gears
Right,
to
exactly.
get ready to send a signal.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not just a static lock and key.
No, it's not.
There's actual movement.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
So this movement basically triggers a cascade of events inside the cell.
Okay.
And the first thing to happen is the activation of these G proteins.
I remember those. Those are like the internal messengers.
Yes, exactly. They carry instructions from the receptor
Got it.
to other parts of the cell.
So the G proteins are like couriers.
Yeah, perfect analogy.
Okay.
Taking information from the receptor
Yeah.
to the cellular machinery.
That makes sense. Okay.
And depending on which G protein is involved,
Okay.
different pathways will get activated,
Right.
leading to all sorts of different effects.
Okay, so for instance.
So, for example, CB1 often interacts with a G protein that inhibits the production of this molecule called CAMP.
CAMP, I remember that from the research.
Yeah.
But what does it do?
So CAMP, you can think of it as like a cellular alarm ball.
Okay.
Its levels, they go up and down in
Yeah.
response to all sorts of different signals.
Right.
And that can trigger different cellular responses.
Okay.
So when CB1 reduces CAMP levels,
Yeah.
it can have a huge impact on different processes in the cell,
Like what kind of process?
like neurotransmission, pain signaling, even appetite regulation.
Wow. Okay, so it's like CB1 is like a volume control for all these different cellular lines.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's really cool.
And that's affecting so many different functions.
Yeah, so that's the beauty of this whole system.
Yeah.
It's really interconnected, it's adaptable, and it allows for this really fine-tuned regulation
Yeah.
of all these physiological processes.
Got it.
And the domino effect doesn't even stop there.
Really?
So CB1 activation can also trigger other pathways,
Right.
like one called MAPK.
What does that do?
And that one can even influence gene expression.
Wow. So we're going from these tiny molecules
Yeah,
all the way up to like the blueprint of our bodies.
right. And it just shows how powerful CB1 activation can be.
Yeah.
It's not just about these immediate changes in neurotransmitter levels or
Mhm.
cell signaling.
Yeah.
It can actually influence the way cells behave over the long term
Wow.
by changing their genetic programming.
Okay, so we have this huge cascade of events,
Right.
all triggered by one molecule binding to CB1.
Right.
But how does this all connect back to those specific functions we were talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Like pain modulation and appetite regulation.
That's what's so cool about this whole system.
Okay, so we've talked about the structure of CB1, where it is in the body, and now we've got a pretty good grasp on how it works on this molecular level with this intricate cascade that's happening.
Yeah.
But when we talk about CB1 influencing all these different processes, I have to wonder, what does that mean for developing new therapies?
Yeah, that's a really important question.
Yeah.
I mean, the more we understand CB1, the more we realize how much potential it has for new treatments.
Okay.
Think about things like, chronic pain,
Yeah.
multiple sclerosis, anxiety, even PTSD.
Wow.
These are all areas where changing CB1 activity could really make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah, for sure. And in the research you shared, it was mentioned that CB1 is kind of this hot target for drug development.
It is.
Can you talk a little about, what are some specific examples of how researchers are actually trying to harness the potential of CB1?
Sure. So one area that researchers have been exploring is using synthetic cannabinoids. So these are basically molecules that mimic the body's own endocannabinoids.
Right.
And they can bind to CB1 and activate those natural pain relief pathways,
Okay.
but without having to rely on opioids,
Right.
which we know can have a lot of negative side effects.
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of like giving the endocannabinoid system this little boost,
Exactly.
but in a much more controlled and targeted way.
Yeah, it's a more precise approach.
So what other strategies are being explored besides these synthetic cannabinoids?
So another approach is to actually develop medications that block CB1.
Oh, so instead of activating it, you block it.
Right, and this approach has shown some promise in treating obesity and metabolic disorders
Interesting.
because it can reduce appetite and influence how the body manages energy.
So it's not just a one-size-fits-all.
No, definitely not.
You can either activate it or block it.
Yeah, exactly. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Right, the therapeutic goal.
And this is why understanding CB1's structure and where it's located is so important.
Yeah, I could see that it's like you need to have the blueprint
Exactly. You need that blueprint.
to guide this drug development process.
Yeah,
So you can design molecules that are really specific.
that's the goal. Yeah.
Okay, so it's all about precision.
Yes.
Finding the right tool for the right job.
Exactly.
But I imagine there are some challenges involved too.
Oh, absolutely.
It can't just be about finding a molecule that binds to CB1.
No, it's not that simple.
What are some of the challenges that researchers are facing?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is designing drugs that are really selective for CB1
Oh, so-
over CB2.
Right, because we have those two main receptors.
Yes, and while they're similar,
Yeah.
they have different distributions and functions
Right.
throughout the body.
So if a drug binds to both, what could happen?
Well, you could end up with some unintended consequences.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure, so let's say you're developing a drug for pain management,
Mm-hmm.
and you want it to target CB1 in the central nervous system. But it also activates CB2 in the immune system.
Yeah.
So you might end up suppressing immune function.
Oh, so you're kind of like accidentally hitting the wrong switch.
Exactly.
That's
Okay.
not what you want.
Got it. And what about side effects? I mean, given that CB1 is involved in all of these processes,
Right.
even if we have a really targeted drug, there's still potential for unintended effects.
Absolutely. That's something we always have to consider.
What kind of side effects?
Well, we have to be mindful of potential effects on memory, mood, even motor function.
Okay.
These are all areas that are really sensitive to CB1 activity.
Right.
So even small changes can have really noticeable effects.
So it seems like rigorous testing is really important.
Absolutely, yeah.
And really just carefully weighing the risks and benefits.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive
Yeah,
into the world of the CB1 receptor.
it really is a fascinating area.
From its structure to its location to its role in all these different processes.
Yeah, it's clear that CB1 is so important for human health and well-being.
It really is.
And it seems like we're really just starting to understand it.
We're just scratching the surface.
That's pretty exciting.
It is. There's still so much to learn about this receptor and how we can harness its therapeutic potential.
Well, I'll leave our listeners with one last thought.
Okay.
We've talked about all these medications that target CB1.
Right.
But what about lifestyle interventions?
That's a great point.
Could things like diet and exercise, or maybe even mindfulness practices,
Possibly.
influence CB1 activity?
Yeah.
And in turn, affect our overall health?
It's a great question to consider
Yeah.
as we continue to explore this amazing world of the endocannabinoid system.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. I really enjoyed it. It was really fascinating.
Me too. Thanks for having me.